Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm from Peru. I am very happy to be in this country and this amazing continent. Okay. My presentation is about the respect the participant of community education with cultural adequacy to conduct research in indigenous Peruvian communities about shared data and biobanking. I work in an ethics committee in my university, and I was a Fogarty Fellow Flaxo from Argentina. My professor is here, Florencia Luna, and the other was Ruth Macklin. And my co-author is Lucia Vegaso, is here too. Indigenous population of Peru have a great ancestral cultural richness, but they also suffer from native environmental disease and have genetic and genomic components that need to be researched. Collecting and biobanking samples from this population could be a great alternative for such a research. This case study describes research with 40 Aymaras and Quechuas population from Peru. And education intervention about biobanks. The first research objective was to know about attitudes and perceptions about using biobanking for research with their communities and the ethical safeguards that indigenous communities will require before accepting such as use of biological material. The second objective was to access that. The second objective was to access the impact of an educative program which uses booklets with drawings, videos, and social dramas to provide information about use of biobanking. Our methodology. The first step was made a focus group for know the attitudes and perception about using biobanking for research with indigenous communities and the ethical safeguards for indigenous communities will require before accepting such use of biological material and biobanking. This is the result of the first step about focus group. About the own definition, about, oh my God. I don't have, the answer were, I don't have information about biobanks, place where blood is stored, place where organs are stored, place where human biological material and associated information is stored for one or more research purposes, place where human biological material is stored, or place where organ and blood are kept for when emergency happens. The second question was about the benefits of biobanks. Before educational program in a focus group, they said no idea, use of biobanks to find the cause of disease, diagnostic improvement, appropriate treatment alternatives for their communities, investigate to help in the future, investigate to save life, investigate to create new medicine, investigate to know the disease or how they prevent the disease, and no benefits. And the third question was about risk of biobanks. They don't identify higher risk, that the sample are stored, valued, and donated in vain, that the sample be lost and donated in vain, that they use the data for other topics that are not research, risk when extracting samples with bad techniques or lost the privacy. And the fourth question was, the second step was give information about tips, preference of informed consent. We gave them alternatives of specific informed consent, broad informed consent or general informed consent, dynamic informed consent, waiver of informed consent, or storage consent. This is a previous experience about the question cultural for consent form in Aymaras people in Peru. The second step was develop an educational intervention. We don't have idea how we can start about educational intervention. First, we began with a review of information on cultural aspects for pre-Inca culture and Inca medicine to share this information with the indigenous population. We review information about the indigenous culture, about the process of health, and we found this. The indigenous community until now was preserved in the ancient culture traditions such as agriculture, spirituality, or the use of traditional medicine for therapeutic purpose. The saving of food for times of drought or misfortune or an emergency. In a life beyond the heart, in the wisdom of their ancient Incas praise in their current shamans and midwives. The indigenous people live in harmony and respect of the nature, the mountains, and all the things that represent the spirit of life. We found the indigenous population of Peru suffer from native environmental disease and have genetic and genomic components that need to be researched. We have a lot infectious disease. What was the idea? In the Inca trial, we found tambos. This is a special bill for preserve food for Incas. This is tambos or colca. There are two similar. For the old Inca Empire, colca and tambos were the granaries where the corn, seed, deshydrated meat, forage of animals were deposited. The target population received training in analogy with information from the biobanks, which are similar to the muhu, colca, or tambos, which for centuries have functioned as storehouses for sweet and food that have served indigenous population. The biobanks could be the reservoirs of a store of biological samples, the seeds. Would be the biological sample useful for the investigation of disease of indigenous population. The study population also received information on how doctors from the pre-Inca and Inca cultures investigate and treat the disease without causing harm to the population. The biobanks will be the reservation of a store of biological sample, and these seeds will be the biological sample used for the investigation of disease on the indigenous population. The study population also received information about from the pre-Incas and Inca cultures investigate and treat the disease without causing harm to the population. Similar as investigation with biobanks and treatment disease without causing harm to the population too. Cultural appropriate education intervention can be effective tools in the context and can have a favorable impact in the acceptance of the use of biobank in indigenous communities. This was the methodology. Tambos and muhucolca were a place where food could be stored in a case of emergency that ensure the survival of the population. Currently, the indigenous population of Peru preserve the habit now in this moment. Indigenous populations of Peru suffer from native and environmental disease and have genetic and genomic components that need to be researched. Collected and biobank samples from this population could be a great alternative to find the case of disease improvement and diagnostic of treatment of the case of emergency for their communities. This ensure good living of population. We use analog scale. Yes, I don't know, and no. Results. Aymaras and Quechuas leaders were interviewed before and after educative program to access the impact before the intervention. 60% of the leaders have objection about their samples confidentiality, about afraid about who could have access to their samples, about the information to be used of research, about the access rights to the obtain results in the research, about the process of the informed consent should be conducted, and almost everyone have several questions about the final destination of this or the structure of the issues. After the educational intervention, the leaders improve their attitude and perception about the biobanking and its potential use in research into case of disease prevalent in the Aymaras or Quechuas, which could lead to the improvement of diagnostic and treatment for their communities. Some results, the blue is before the educational intervention, and orange is after educational program. This is about own knowledge, the own definition about biobanks. They have a bad, I can understand, a bad misconception understanding of biobanks with blue was more than half, and after the educational program, they have improved a regular or good understanding of biobanks. This is about definition, the own definition of biobanks. They answer, I don't have information about biobanks, please where blood is stored, etc. The most common before the educational program was, I don't have information about biobanks. And after the educational program was place where human biological material and associated information is stored for one or more research purposes. It was about the benefits of biobanks. Before the educational program, they don't have idea about benefits of biobanks. And after the education, this is the answers. They have the principal answer was investigate to know disease of their communities, and for diagnostic improvement, investigate to heal in the future. This is about risk. About risk, before the educational program, the principal risk was there were a lot. Their samples stored badly and donated in vain. Their sample be lost, lost privacy, etc. But after the educational intervention, they don't identify higher risk in 37%. About the preference of type of informed consent, before educational program, they don't have idea about the consent process. After that, they prefer different, several type of consent form, but the most important was specific informed consent, consent for each study. And second was general informed consent, and dynamic informed consent. About the background, we have different kind of indigenous people. The most frequently are Aymaras and Quechuas. We live in a high altitude, and we have a lot of infectious disease, and we need the research. About ethical issues with commentary of each issue. During this research, we conducted focus group with community leaders and with Peruvian researchers to identify the ethics recommendation for biobanking research. The recommendations include inclusion of indigenous leaders in the development of research proposals for biobanking indigenous samples. Ensure the cultural adequacy of the informed consent with the help of translators and representative leaders of the indigenous communities for the use of secondary samples. Using samples to identify solutions for population health priorities. promoting activity community between research and indigenous community about relevant information for the results, return the community and health system, and changing data with other institutions with similar indigenous population for no double research. Ensure that interests of sample donors are protected by promoting data confidentiality, stigmatization prevention, and the right to accept the refused participation of research with secondary samples. Creating organization and regulation that ensure the ethical store and destruction of the samples. Collaborative research with biobanking and indigenous communities can have more benefits than risks if care is taken to promote consent and maintain the privacy of medical and genetic data. The last one. Commentary and conclusion. Respect for autonomy and protection of the confidentiality are key consideration research on samples from indigenous communities. Collaborative research with genomic data exchange related to health could provide solutions to communities with fewer resources for the research, comprise the principle of justice and equity. It is necessary for ethical oversight of genetic and genomic data links to the community, as well as mechanisms to teach, store, and destruction, respect the beliefs, customs, and rituals of a community. Research ethics committees can be strengthened by promoting active participation of community members and empowerment of institutions that protect shared data and biobanking internationally and at all stages of the research process, including sample collection, store, study, and destruction. Conclusion. Before implementing research data sharing and biobanking in indigenous community, it's necessary to develop process respecting the sensitive and custom of each culture. Culturally appropriate education intervention can be effective tools in this context and can have a favorable impact in the acceptance of the use of biobanking in indigenous community. It's also important to promote culturally appropriate educate programs focusing indigenous communities and communities in general about the importance of biobank research to sensitize the population. It is also important to provide information about effective measures to protect data confidentiality in the consent process. Thank you so much, Adriane, Claudia, and Susan, for the corrections, suggestions, comments, and your patience. Thank you to my co-author, Lucia, for being my teamwork always. Thanks, Global Forum, Welcome Trust, and all the organizer and sponsor of this opportunity. Thank you, Fogarty and Flaxon, for all your support of these years, and thanks the Peruvian indigenous who agreed to be part of this present study. Thank you.